and we've been doing voice projects ever since. We've done over 1,500 Microsoft Voice projects, probably 300 of them for EDU. I'd say 90% of those are higher ed, 10% K through 12. My goal today is to educate you guys on some of the problems that we're seeing Microsoft Teams phone systems solve in the very short term. Long term, I think you can take some of the here and think strategically, but I do want to talk about some of the short-term fixes. To do that, I'll lay out the options. There's a couple of terms that are important and a couple of ways that our customers are skinning this cat. And then briefly go through how quickly and easy it is to set up dial tone for home workers. And then a little more sophisticated, talk about the process for actually creating a brand or a auto answer system for your work groups, registration, financial aid, alumni relations, and the like. So here's the problem that we're trying to solve. That was a month ago when everybody was on campus and they're accessing the traditional telephony system there and getting out to the PSTN, the phone network there. And then your users were probably from their PCs accessing Office 365, Enterprise Mobility Suite, and all the other on-premises line of business apps and cloud services. Here's us today, for the most part. Everyone's pretty well gotten a hold of how they're going to get a worker from home to get access to their Office 365 and cloud services. Maybe as some of you experience with WVD, you've gotten access to your on-premises line of business apps through VDI, but you still have this phone system over there. And so we're seeing a lot of people saying, okay, how do I address that issue? If you want to get dial tone to that home worker from work or from campus, you somehow have to tie them together, and there's a couple different ways you can do that. One, if your phone system is current, you could most likely get a PBX soft phone to work. It won't work all that well through a VPN, so unless your phone system has some sort of a proxy or session border controller to make plumbing work through your firewall and the like, that's not always easy, but perhaps you've already gotten that far and took the simple route. The real brute force mechanism here would be if your phone system can support call forwarding, which most do, and you just want to say, okay, if my work phone is supposed to ring, take the phone call and route it around to an individual cell phone. That can work as well. There's some security risks of doing that on your phone system because of toll fraud and the like, but it's a brute force way to get the call to one person. The challenge is if you have to get the call to multiple people, and how do you process calls on behalf of several people that could answer, and to do that, or to enable simply a workaround if you don't like option number 1 or 2, you can enable Teams. There's some fundamental technology terminologies that I'll throw out here for those of you that are uninitiated to this world. The PSTN is the phone service that you get from your mobile provider, or in the past your home telco provider. These days might get circuits from Verizon or AT&T on premises. Those guys connect you to the PSTN. Phone system is Microsoft's brand for their dial tone service that you get out of Microsoft Teams and formerly Skype for Business. They still have that service around until July 2021. Calling plan is the way that you would order service from Microsoft to be your complete phone service provider. And that contrasts with direct routing, which is another way you can get phone service, effectively keeping whichever phone service provider you like on campus or in the cloud, and not going into Microsoft full blast, whereby Microsoft handles your calling processing, your meetings, your instant messaging. But if you make or take a call to that public switch telephone network, that would go through a traditional telco provider. Pictorially, those fundamentals look kind of like this. You've got your campus on the left. You've got an outside caller on the right. You've got these two ways to connect. One is simply give your user a headset or a handset and use the calling plans to make those calls right out of Microsoft's cloud. And inbound and outbound calls work. You can port your numbers. You can create new phone numbers. In a pinch, we're seeing that significantly. Secondly, if you want to use that direct routing, you keep your own telco on premises. You connect it to a box or a virtual machine called a session border controller. And in that case, you basically handle the bill for the actual long distance, international, and local calls through your traditional telco, as opposed to the yellow line, which is where Microsoft will actually send you a bill which includes the calling service. So here's some kind of options if you decide to use Teams. Number one, you could go with phone system in 3 different ways. Remember, phone system is the way Microsoft handles everything, including the in and outbound calls. Number one, and this was the case for a university that we helped out in Illinois who wanted to route calls from their traditional phone system to their workers remotely. They couldn't use a soft phone, and they wanted to use multiple people to answer those calls. So they used the simple call forwarding capabilities of their phone system. So a call came into registration, and instead of that ringing a group of people who were sitting on campus, they flipped that call over to Microsoft, to a new dummy number, if you will. And through the settings of Microsoft's auto attendance and call queues, which I will wrap up with later, they can route the call to multiple people who any one of them can answer, and the call is handled by an available and qualified skill set. So that's the first brute force mechanism. You could go with new numbers. This was done by a K-12 over in Olympia, Washington. Their use case was an emergency as well. In the work from home, the learn from home program that they initiated, they have a lot of students in that district who don't have internet access. And it was a mandate from the school board that said they need to have some way for the teachers to be able to contact and communicate with these students. And so the union would not allow the teachers to use their own cell phones. So they hurriedly set up a process to use Microsoft Teams. They couldn't use direct routing. It took too long because they had a mandate to quickly turn these things around, as you all may. And then so they decided to use calling plans. So as a short-term fix to get them through the rest of the semester and perhaps sometime into summer school, they enabled 2,200 teachers with brand new numbers on phone system. Now, these are brand new numbers that they acquired in the 425 area code, because you can pick your own numbers so you look like you're calling from your own neck of the woods, even though your data center is probably in a different state. And so this is a really quick fix. We got 2,200 teachers up and running in 4 days, whereby they're all now using Teams as a soft phone, and their students without internet who can't do a Teams meeting can make a phone call or receive a phone call to those teachers who are sitting on Teams wherever they may be, of course, using their mobile device if that's their pleasure with the Teams mobile app. Because now when they make a call from either their mobile client or their PC, their phone number appears to be the work number that's been provisioned out of the Microsoft calling plans. It may take a little while longer to do 1C, but if you decide to go long-term into phone system, you can port your phone numbers over to Microsoft and keep the same numbers, caller ID in and outbound being the same, no problem. And then last but not least is direct routing. We've got another short-term case study there. This is from a system, again, in Washington, whose mandate there was so that the district office headquarters folks could receive calls in their homes. And in this situation, they had a Cisco call manager on premises, and they set up a scenario in which they kept the same phone numbers but used the direct routing capability. Remember, direct routing is where you have a session border controller sitting there, and it has the ability to take calls that are terminating locally, so you don't need calling plans, but you use your real numbers. You basically put this session border controller in place, and then what that does is it finds the user no matter where they're sitting on Teams. So that one was enabled for a couple thousand users in another system in Washington, but they didn't have quite the overhead and expense to pay Microsoft every month, because with Direct Route, you don't pay the entire calling plan license. You just pay for the A5, and the existing phone system terminates those calls. So that solved their problem. And so there's a few ways you can kind of skin this short-term cat using the tools. And this stuff has impressed IT pros at how fast you can actually get this stuff working. So here's a example of that number 3 scenario, or excuse me, number 2 scenario, the Direct Route. So they kept their Cisco call manager there on-prem, and the session border controller in this case can go in 2 places. If you can get on campus and deploy a piece of physical appliance or a virtual machine, you can put it on-prem. And then your phone system basically can step out of the loop. You can start taking calls on Teams no matter where you are. What this customer did, because it was so rushed, was they basically took a session border controller, put it in Azure, and eliminated the need for any on-prem hardware or any need to go in to the office to actually mount anything or configure anything. So by using session border controllers in Azure, you can effectively cloudify everything and not need any appliances. There is an advantage to this long-term back here, because if you leave it connected to your phone system, then you can have all kinds of integrations with analog devices or other traditional campus requirements, like emergency phones in the parking lots and blue lights and the like. So those boxes, if they're physical, have a better Swiss Army knife approach than the virtual SBCs, especially those, of course, that sit out in Azure. But the reason you do this is so that you didn't have to go all in with Microsoft's calling plans. Because if a user is only making a call or 2 a day, there's probably better rates that you can negotiate with a traditional public switch telephone network provider. All right, so with the plumbing out of the way, some of the other prerequisites, you're going to need phone system licenses either way. You have to have the A5 or these phone system licenses. So in either case, for direct routing or calling plans, you need the phone system SKU. If you choose to, you then add the calling plan on top of that. You need a valid headset. Speakerphones can work pretty well. Speakerphones of native surfaces. I'm speaking to you now from mine, and it generally behaves well enough. If it's a call that you want to optimize, you plug in a USB headset or a physical headset. If you're on campus and you want a phone, there's phones that about 4 different vendors make for long-term use of this service. You must have decent bandwidth. Try to keep the kids off of the Xbox while you're doing this. PBX programming is necessary if you're going to forward calls. So if you want to take calls that hit your PBX and say, we don't have anybody here to take them, flip them out to Microsoft to be answered by someone remotely, you do need to get into that phone system and set up the forward. Some PBXs disallow call forwarding due to security rules, and that may be a little niche or nit that you have to fix in the phone system if you decide to do that. And then you have to do some Teams programming for the users. The good news is what I'll show you is pretty quick and dirty on how to do that. And potentially, if you want multiple people at home answering the calls for the registration, financial aid, student services offices, and you have students and or faculty, they can be intermingled as long as they have an Office 365 cred and a phone system license, then they can be a part of these queues to answer in person and or after a robot answers.
One quick question, Chris, is Dave.
Sure. Yes.
So I'm getting a little bit of echo. I don't know if somebody else is not on mute. Anyways, we're all good now. So where this is, I've seen this come up a lot, right, is people are already thinking in the recruitment and retention office about how do we handle incoming freshmen, right, coming in this or potentially returning or not returning freshmen. So they're doing, sophomores, whatever. So how hard is it just in, if 10 is extremely difficult and 1, simple, Steve Lane could do it or I could do it. If you're looking to set up kind of a call routing queue using Teams voice and a group of people, just, time delineation, what does that kind of look like? Let's say we have 7 people we're trying to put in a queue. How difficult is that?
If you're going to use calling plans and new numbers, that would take you 2 hours. You'd
Okay.
have to patiently wait for the provisioning. The provisioning can take, at this point, Microsoft's soft SLA is 48 hours.
Okay.
So if this is something that you want to work towards for next Monday, start tomorrow. But it's simple. The steps that I'll show here, if you're going to use new numbers, are quite easy.
Okay. Great. Thank you. And
Sure.
when you engage with a customer, how long does it take you outside of the provisioning process? How much labor, just again in a small kind of you know um, calling group, and some queuing. How many hours of work on your guys?
Usually a day or less because there's
Okay.
some education involved, but rather than us do every user and every queue, our typical approach is to teach people to fish
Okay.
and make a template for them to just reuse with different, prompts and things like that for
Awesome.
different queues.
Awesome. Thank you. Keep going.
Sure. Thank you. So these are the steps to configure the users. You reserve their phone numbers, assign them to a location. Location is important because that's going to allow you to specify the emergency services location so that if there is a reason for them to call 911 from this soft phone, then the ambulance won't roll up to their a vague location. There's going to be some specificity to that. And then you have to assign a license to each individual user, and then you have to assign the number to an individual user. If you want to go a step further than that and set up the call queues and prompts, then you have to configure the call queue. The call queue is effectively the routing mechanism that allows the system to find an available and qualified agent. So if you're thinking about a call center, this is how the call actually gets to the person who picks up, as opposed to the auto attendant, which is what you experience when you call in to the system and the recorded voice greets you. And so you kind of configure this from the inside out. If you're doing the call queues, you basically say, how do I want the call to eventually route to a person? And then last but not least, you say, what do I want the caller's experience to be? And you can see there are several steps here, some of which I'll outline. But you can do things like different queues, different languages, different hours of support. You can make your own greetings. People get tickled by this when they realize, gee, I don't have to go to the office anymore or fire up some antiquated FTP kind of software and record my voice and then pump that into my old voice system. You can type into the administrative interface of Teams, and the computer will say in a really nice multi-language voice, if you choose it, exactly what you've typed. So people like that back even before COVID for emergency IVR features where a snow day or some other emergency caused them to close the office or answer their phones differently. That was nice to have then and even more so now. So I'll flip through a few of the screens and point out a few of the important things here in the next 5 minutes before we wrap. And then as you wish, I'll be happy to provide these slides so you can kind of get this step by step. But the first thing you need to do is you need to grab some phone numbers. You can see these are available in most every community in the States. You basically would find your region, country in this case for the US. You'd say, which kind of numbers do I want to get here? Because there's a few. You can see the differences. Some of these, if you want a toll-free number, that's an extra cost, by the way. You pay for those as you use them. So if you have the wherewithal at this point, simply publish and use a local number. But as you port numbers into this system or want to define new numbers that are toll-free, you do have that option. So you define the type of the number you want to get. You'd search for the location of the number you want. So this is, I put in Microsoft's office here in Chicago, and it gives me our 3 local area codes. Actually, 3 of the 5 are available because the others are in use. So you'll find something local. And again, this is a point where you'd say, what is the location? Because it's important at this point to be considering E911 laws. You must specify a physical location, which is validated by Microsoft. And so if I put in this number, it's going to find the location of the business in this case, and then regurgitate that. If you mistype something, it's going to block that until you get the address right. So then you'd reserve the number or numbers, and then you can go in and assign those to users. So assigning those to users is pretty simple. You find them in the users list and then assign a number, grab an available number. Here's some of the play-by-play of the call queues. So these are the options for routing users. To clarify, Microsoft isn't intending to be a robust airline or insurance agency's call center. This service is built for info workers and nominally or marginally simple contact center needs. You can see here that you can play audio recordings for music on hold. You can go in several types of routing, that being serial, round robin. The one that we like is attendant routing, so you can pick the least available, the most available agent. And that is to say that if someone's answered all the calls previously, they're going to get a break while the next person up gets the next ring, so that you can assure to balance some calls. You can enable people to enter the queue and exit the queue at that little bitty configuration there. And I'll show what that user experience is like in a little bit. You can specify what happens during overflow. Of course, you can simply just route the call to a voicemail or to another queue. If you're going to have multiple of these groups of users that are set up to take certain types of calls, you can overflow student services with registration, etc. And then that's how you route the calls. And then to present the caller with the experience that you desire, here's your auto attendant settings. And again, as David asked, this is 25 minutes per, including some testing if you kind of have an idea of how you want this to flow, or if you just want to repeat what you've done on your existing systems. There is no limit to the depth or breadth of these things. You wouldn't want to go and say, press 1 for this, 2, 3, 4, 9, because that's just an absurd amount of hold time and wait time. But you do have the ability to do that if that's your business need. And again, you can play an audio file that you upload. You can see, you can make a recording of a professional voice and put that up there. You can type a greeting message, which is the easiest way to do this on the fly, and that would give you the flexibility to change that as you need it. And then you basically say, once that message is played and someone's selected some prompts, what do you do with it? So you redirect it at that point to a call queue, and that gets the call to a set of individuals. One of the other nice things as you think about this as a potential long-term option is you do have the ability to present the caller with the option to say the name of the person they're trying to reach, and that will route the call via speech-to-text conversion and look up into Azure AD and find that person. So you can see here kind of how those prompts work. If you press or say 1, you're going to get to certain things. You've got business hours. There's the dial by name setting down there, and you can have holidays and the other necessities to run your campus. New Year's, holidays, and then you can find or exclude people. So if you don't want people to be searching for your president or superintendent and then calling them through this service, you can exclude those. And then finally, the user experience, if you are in one of those auto attendant call queues, this is where you'd log in and log out. So at the bottom, you can see I'd toggle that switch over if I were to go to lunch or be off that day. That takes me out of the queue. Kind of an important thing if you don't want to be bothered after hours or out of your shift. So that's briefly it. To summarize, we're finding it a really good short-term fix for specific use cases, some of which I've outlined. There are abilities to set up these auto attendants and have a series of people or a group of people answer calls for your business needs. It's those agents that join the call queues via that slider that I just showed you, and then at that point, they're able to take calls that get directed to them from that auto attendant. And then you really need the phone system license, and if you decide to go the quick and easy way, you do need a calling plan license to add to your monthly recurring expense. That's a quick overview, and I'll be happy to take any questions. And I'm going to go back to that chat that you guys all were answering some of those other team questions a little later and help contribute there as well.
Absolutely. Feel free to put them in the community channel within Teams. No, I think that's really helpful. If people want to get a hold of you, Chris, would you like to type in your email address somewhere, either in the channel or on a slide? Or I think I put it in the meeting invite as well, chris.stagg at enabling. Oh, okay, that'll work too. TEGH. Who came up with that naming convention? Was that you?
Some great ancestor of mine with probably a longer name back in the day.
Perfect. Well, really appreciate it. I know.
Show up, did it? Is it
What's
all
that?
there?
I see TEGH at
That is so
enabling.
strange. Yeah, I'm typing it on my while I have the. That's gotta be fixed here. One more moment. Let's see if that works.
Oh, I don't know if if anybody has any questions. I'm going to stop recording here for a minute, so we can do that, and then we will go from there. All righty. So appreciate that, Chris. I know there's been a lot of discussion around.